Ada's screams pierced the quiet of the village night as she clutched the woven mat beneath her. The midwife's hands moved quickly, steady but strained, while Ngozi whispered prayers through tears. A child's body was never meant for this. And yet, with one final, heart-wrenching cry, Ada's small frame gave way to the life she had carried, a baby's wail echoing in the stillness as the weight of impossible innocence filled the room. 7-year-old Ada has just given birth, and how was that even possible? How did we get here? I will tell you how it all started, the story of Ada. It all started when I decided to send my little daughter to the city for a better life. I entrusted her into the care of a lady I have respect for, not knowing she didn't care at all for our poor family. The day my sweet Ada left, I never knew her life would change forever. Ada's small feet stumbled on the uneven streets of Lagos as she clutched her only possession, a small bag holding her village clothes. The city loomed around her, overwhelming in its cacophony of sounds and motion. Her aunt, Auntie Clara, led the way briskly, her high heels clicking on the pavement. Ada struggled to keep up, her wide eyes taking in the towering buildings and the sea of unfamiliar faces. When they arrived at Auntie Clara's flat, Ada was introduced to her new life. The room she would sleep in was a corner of the kitchen, with a thin mat rolled out for her. Auntie Clara, always in a rush, barely had time to explain the rules. Ada was to help with chores, run errands, and keep quiet. No slacking, Ada. We don't tolerate laziness here, her aunt snapped, her voice sharp like the blade of a knife. As the night fell, Ada lay on the mat, trying to suppress the tears welling up in her eyes. She missed her parents and the quiet village where the stars seemed to shine brighter. But she had been sent here for a reason, to help her family by working in the city. "You're a big girl now," her mother had said, her voice filled with reluctant hope. Ada clung to those words like a lifeline, not knowing what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Auntie Clara's voice cut through the stillness like a whip. "Ada, get up and fetch water." Ada scrambled to her feet, slipping on her sandals before grabbing the bucket. The task seemed straightforward, but navigating the crowded neighborhood was daunting. The streets were alive with the sound of street vendors shouting their wares and children playing noisily. By afternoon, Ada had completed several errands, her body aching from the weight of carrying groceries and water. Auntie Clara's demands were relentless, and her sharp tongue left Ada feeling smaller with each passing hour. As dusk approached, her aunt handed her a crumpled bill. "Go buy pepper from Mama Titi. And hurry up." Ada hesitated. The sky was darkening, and the thought of walking alone at night frightened her. But Auntie Clara's glare silenced any protest. The street was eerily quiet as Ada hurried toward the shop. Shadows danced under the flickering streetlights, and her heart pounded with every step. She felt a growing sense of unease, but pressed on, her mind repeating her mother's words, "Be brave, my child." The dimly lit streets seemed endless as Ada clutched the money tightly in her fist. Every shadow felt alive, and the occasional bark of a dog made her jump. She walked briskly, her small legs moving as fast as they could. Mama Titi's shop was a good distance away, but it was the only one Auntie Clara trusted. Ada hated these night errands, but she had learned to obey without question. Halfway to the shop, a man appeared from the shadows, startling her. He was tall, his face obscured by a cap pulled low over his eyes. "Hey, little girl," he said, his voice smooth but unsettling. Ada froze, unsure of what to do. The man stepped closer, his smile widening. "Where are you going all alone at this hour?" Ada's instinct was to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. "I'm going to Mama Titi's shop," she stammered, her voice barely audible. The man chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Be careful, little one. The night isn't safe for children," he said before walking away. Ada stood there trembling, watching him disappear into the darkness before forcing herself to continue. When she finally reached Mama Titi's shop, she let out a shaky breath. The warmth of the lantern-lit store and Mama Titi's familiar face provided a brief sense of relief. "Why are you out so late, Ada?" Mama Titi asked, her voice filled with concern. Ada only shrugged, too scared to share what had just happened. After collecting the pepper, she hurried back home, her heart racing with every step. Back at the flat, Auntie Clara barely glanced at Ada as she handed over the pepper. "What took you so long?" her aunt barked, but Ada was too exhausted to explain. She curled up on her mat, her mind replaying the encounter with the strange man. She wanted to tell her aunt, but the fear of being dismissed or scolded held her back. The following evening, Auntie Clara handed Ada another errand. This time, Ada hesitated. "Auntie, it's dark outside," she said timidly. Her aunt's sharp eyes bore into her. "Don't be foolish, Ada. The city is safe enough. Just go and don't waste my time." Ada didn't argue further, but as she walked the now familiar route, her fear grew. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her grip on the money tighter than before. The street felt more ominous, and she quickened her pace, praying she wouldn't encounter the man again. When she returned safely that night, Ada felt a small sense of victory, but the uneasy feeling in her chest remained. She didn't know how to explain it, but something about these errands felt wrong, as if danger was lurking just beyond the light of the street lamps. The streets of Lagos carried an air of menace Ada could not ignore. Every flickering streetlight seemed to cast shadows that whispered warnings. On one particular night, as she headed home from an errand, her heart stopped when she saw the man from before leaning casually against a lamppost. He watched her approach, his eyes sharp and unsettling. "Hello again," he said, stepping forward. His smile was wide, but there was something predatory about it. Ada's grip on her bag tightened. She nodded politely, but didn't slow her pace. The man followed her, his footsteps echoing behind her. "You're too young to be out alone," he said, his voice smooth. Ada ignored him, her mind racing. When she finally reached her building and bolted inside, she leaned against the door, her chest heaving. She was safe for now. The next morning, Ada tried to tell Auntie Clara about the man. She described his unsettling presence, her voice trembling. Auntie Clara barely looked up from her phone. "You're being silly, Ada. Stop imagining things and focus on your chores." The dismissal stung, but Ada didn't argue. Who would believe a 7-year-old anyway? That night, Auntie Clara handed Ada another errand. This time, Ada begged to stay home. "Please, Auntie, I'm scared," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. Clara rolled her eyes. "Scared of what?" "The boogeyman." She shoved a few naira notes into Ada's hand and pushed her toward the door. "Hurry up and don't waste my time." Ada reluctantly stepped out, her heart pounding as she walked into the darkness. The streets were eerily quiet, and Ada's nerves were on edge. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see the man at any moment. When she turned a corner, there he was. This time, he didn't smile or speak. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Ada screamed, but he covered her mouth with his hand, dragging her into a nearby alley. Ada struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the man was too strong. The world blurred as tears streamed down her face. The pain was unbearable, and her muffled cries echoed in the empty alley. The night seemed endless, and Ada felt her world shatter into pieces. When the man finally let his guard down, Ada saw her chance. Summoning all her strength, she bit his hand and wrenched herself free. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her vision blurred by tears. Every step felt like a mile, but she didn't stop until she reached the flat. She burst through the door, her clothes torn and her face pale. Auntie Clara's anger at being woken up quickly turned to shock when she saw Ada's condition. "What happened to you?" she demanded, but Ada couldn't answer. She collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling as the weight of the night crushed her. For days, Ada refused to speak. Auntie Clara pressed her for answers, but every question was met with silence. The older woman grew frustrated, assuming Ada was being difficult. "You're alive, aren't you?" "So, what's the problem?" she snapped, rushing off the incident. Ada retreated further into herself, her once bright spirit now dimmed. She couldn't explain the shame and fear that consumed her. The nightmares began that week, each one replaying the horrific night in vivid detail. Ada would wake up screaming, only to be scolded by Auntie Clara for disturbing the peace. Weeks passed, and Ada began to notice changes in her body. She felt constantly tired, and her stomach churned every morning. She didn't understand what was happening, but her growing nausea made it impossible to ignore. One morning, Auntie Clara found Ada retching in the bathroom. "What's wrong with you now?" she asked, irritated. When Ada couldn't answer, Clara's suspicions grew. The older woman decided to take her to the clinic, determined to uncover the truth. At the clinic, the doctor's expression grew serious as he examined Ada. After asking a few questions, he delivered the news that would change everything. "She's pregnant." Clara stared at the doctor in disbelief. "That's impossible. She's just a child." But the evidence was undeniable. Ada, too young to fully comprehend what the doctor meant, stared blankly at the floor. Clara's initial shock turned to anger. She blamed Ada for the shame she would now have to endure. "How could you let this happen?" she spat, her words cutting deep. Unable to face the gossip and judgment of her neighbors, Clara decided to send Ada back to her parents in the village. "You'll be better off there," she said, as if trying to convince herself. Ada didn't argue. She was too tired to fight. The journey to the village was long and silent. When they arrived, Ada's parents were horrified to see their daughter's condition. Her mother wept, holding Ada close, while her father's face was a mask of fury. The village felt both comforting and suffocating. Ada's parents tried to shield her from the prying eyes of their neighbors, but whispers spread quickly. "She's carrying a child," they said, their voices dripping with judgment. Ada retreated into herself, spending most of her days inside the family compound. Her mother did her best to comfort her, but even her gentle words couldn't erase Ada's pain. Despite the stigma, Ada's parents vowed to protect her. They took her to a local midwife, who assured them that Ada could carry the baby safely. Her mother's love gave Ada a small glimmer of hope. Perhaps life could go on, even after everything she had endured. The midwife's visits became a source of comfort for Ada. The older woman spoke kindly to her, offering advice and encouragement. Slowly, Ada began to believe that she could survive this ordeal. The villagers were relentless in their gossip, but Ada's parents stood firm. Her father, in particular, grew protective, challenging anyone who dared to insult his daughter. "If you have something to say, say it to me," he shouted one day, silencing a group of nosy neighbors. Ada, though grateful for her parents' support, still felt isolated. She avoided the marketplace and spent her days helping her mother with small chores. Life had become a waiting game, each day blending into the next. Ada's father, Jacob, could no longer suppress the fire of rage burning in his heart. He had listened to the whispers of the villagers and endured the looks of pity and judgment cast upon his family. Enough was enough. One morning, he stood up from the breakfast table with a resolve that startled everyone. "I will find the man who did this to my daughter," he announced firmly. His wife, Ngozi, looked at him with concern. "Jacob, it's been months. You don't even know where to start," she said softly, but her words did little to deter him. "I will start in Lagos, where it happened," Jacob replied. He packed a small bag and set off, leaving Ada and her mother in the care of his brothers. Jacob's return to Lagos was overwhelming. The noise and chaos were a stark contrast to the quiet of the village. He began retracing Ada's steps, visiting the neighborhood where she had stayed with Auntie Clara. Most people were unhelpful, shrugging off his questions or claiming not to know anything. But persistence paid off. A shopkeeper near Auntie Clara's flat remembered seeing a man who fit the vague description Ada had given before she left. "He's tall, always wears a cap, and hangs around the alleys at night," the man said. Jacob's heart quickened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The shopkeeper added that the man often worked odd jobs at a mechanic's shop on the outskirts of the city. With this lead, Jacob set out, determined to find the truth. Jacob spent days observing the mechanic's shop, his eyes scanning every worker for someone who matched the description. On the third day, he spotted a man wearing a familiar cap, leaning casually against a car. Anger surged through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. Approaching the shop owner, Jacob asked questions, pretending to be interested in hiring the man. The shop owner confirmed the man's identity and offered a troubling detail. "He comes and goes. doesn't stay in one place for too long," the owner said. Jacob knew he couldn't confront the man alone. He reported the matter to the local police, but their response was slow. "We'll look into it," they said, handing him a case number that felt like a meaningless promise. Back in the village, Ada's labor pains began earlier than expected. Ngozi, with the help of the midwife, prepared for the delivery. The small room was filled with tension as Ada struggled through the pain. Hours later, she gave birth to a baby boy. The midwife smiled, holding up the newborn. "He's healthy and strong," she announced. But Ada turned her face away, unable to look at the child. Ngozi took the baby into her arms, tears streaming down her face. She whispered a prayer, asking for strength to guide her family through this difficult time. Ada struggled to adjust to her new reality. She avoided the baby as much as she could, leaving her mother to handle most of the care. Ngozi, though exhausted, never complained. She understood the emotional weight Ada carried, and knew it would take time for her to heal. The villagers, however, were less understanding. Whispers grew louder, and the stares more piercing. Ada felt the weight of their judgment every time she stepped outside. "That child is a curse," one neighbor muttered. But Ngozi silenced them with a sharp glare, her unwavering love for her daughter evident in every word she spoke. In Lagos, Jacob's patience paid off. The police finally agreed to take action, organizing a small operation to apprehend the man. They staked out the mechanic's shop, waiting for the right moment to strike. The day came when the man arrived at work, unsuspecting of the eyes watching him. The police moved in quickly, surrounding him before he had a chance to run. "You're under arrest," one officer said, locking handcuffs around his wrists. The man protested, shouting his innocence, but Jacob felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the scene unfold. Jacob stood face to face with the man who had destroyed his daughter's innocence. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice trembling with rage. The man sneered, refusing to answer. Jacob stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You will pay for what you've done," he said, his voice low, but filled with conviction. The man maintained his defiance, but his bravado crumbled as the police presented witnesses and evidence tying him to other crimes. Jacob left the station that day with a renewed sense of purpose. Justice was slow, but it was finally within reach. The trial began months later, with Jacob traveling to Lagos to testify. Ada's story was told through her father's words, and the witnesses who had seen the man dragging her into the alley added weight to the case. The man's defense was weak, relying on claims of mistaken identity and lack of evidence. But the testimonies of witnesses and Ada's medical records painted a clear picture. The prosecutor's arguments were strong, leaving little room for doubt. Back in the village, Ada began to heal in small but meaningful ways. Her mother's unwavering support and the presence of her baby slowly softened the walls she had built around herself. She began spending more time with her son, holding him for the first time one quiet evening. The bond between mother and child grew, though Ada still struggled with the memories of her trauma. Ngozi encouraged her gently, reminding her that she was stronger than she realized. "You survived, Ada. That means you can overcome anything," she said one night, holding her daughter close. The court date approached, and Jacob prepared to face the man once more. The trial drew attention from the community, with many showing up to witness the proceedings. Jacob's testimony was emotional, recounting the pain his family had endured. The man remained stoic, but cracks in his facade began to show as the evidence mounted against him. The prosecutor presented a final, damning piece of evidence, a witness who had seen the man leaving the alley on the night of Ada's attack. The witness, a woman who lived near the crime scene, recounted seeing the man dragging Ada into the alley. "I didn't realize what was happening at the time," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But I remember his face clearly." Her testimony was the final blow to the defense. The judge listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. Jacob felt a surge of hope, knowing that justice was finally within reach. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. "Guilty," the judge declared, sentencing the man to a long prison term. Jacob let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down his face. The weight of months of pain and anger began to lift. The man was led away in handcuffs, his defiance replaced by fear. For Jacob, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but nothing could erase what his daughter had endured. With the trial behind them, the family focused on moving forward. Ada, though still healing, began to smile more often. Her sons laughed a broad light into their lives, and the support of her parents gave her the strength to rebuild. The villagers, once harsh in their judgment, began to see Ada in a new light. Her resilience inspired others, and slowly, the whispers of shame turned into words of admiration. Ada's journey was far from over, but she was no longer defined by her pain. She was a survivor, a symbol of hope and strength for all who knew her.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification if you enjoyed the story. Thank you for watching. See you next time.